Hi, my name is Dr. Felucia, and I'm a licensed psychologist. And today I'm going to be talking about a common question that survivors of emotional abuse, especially spiritual abuse, ask themselves. And the question is, did they mean it? Did they know what they were doing? I've gotten a few comments like that on my channel. Of course, the they is referring to the abusive person or institution, but a lot of times people will wonder, well, did this person who hurt me so deeply, did they know what they were doing? Did they do this on purpose? Did they mean to do it? And it's an important question to ask. I think it's important. It's, something that all people who have been through this type of situation will ask themselves. But before you delve into that question, I want you to take a moment, pause the video if you need to, and just ask yourself, why is it so important that I know this, that I know the answer to this? So I'm going to have you pause and just think about that. What are some of those reasons that are coming up for you? So what was your answer when you were thinking about that? Why is it important for you to know the intent of the abuser? Sometimes this can be a really challenging thing to figure out. And I found that for a lot of people, it's a lot of reasons, right? Sometimes they want to know the answer to that because they feel they can't move on unless they know. For some people, they feel like if they did know that that somehow makes their pain less legitimate. And what I mean by that is that, hey, if this person really didn't know what they were doing, it was a mistake, they didn't mean to, then I shouldn't focus on this pain as much, right? It's not that big a deal. And the point is, regardless of anybody's intention, the impact is the impact, right? And so in having a good intention doesn't erase a painful impact. So I think it's really important to remember. And it's important to think about this in very nuanced ways as well. Sometimes I've gotten some comments saying that, well, people's intentions matter, and they do matter. But also when people are saying that that intention is somehow used to erase the impact of what was done, then that is not productive and it's not helpful. So when you think about that question, did they mean to do it? Did they know what they were doing? I don't think that's necessarily a yes or a no answer. I look at the answer to that at probably more on a spectrum, right? Because on some level, if you're doing something to hurt somebody, whether you intend to or not, you could be somewhere on that spectrum of either being completely clueless and not intending to do that, or knowing what you were doing and doing it, right? And we've all been, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, there have been times where we've, messed up and not known that what we were doing was hurtful to someone else, what we were saying. And then there's sometimes where we do know. But even in making those distinctions, I want you to focus on the response of the person. That is a much more important question to ask as to whether they meant it or not, because again, it's not really like a yes or no answer. So when you think about the response of the person, how they react to the realization that they've hurt you, what do they do? That's really what you want to look at. And I have a video that's closely related to that, which talks about apologies, really, and why they don't mean as much as we think they do, and things like that. So I believe that's the name of the video. I will click it. I will put it in the description box. But, thinking about that question, right? How do they respond? How do they react when they have that news that, you were hurt? And this is what I see as something to look for. First of all, you want to look for the person to take responsibility and not be overly defensive. Now, we all get defensive, right? That is just kind of human nature. If someone pokes at something in us that we don't like or points out a wrong, we typically get defensive. We may not show it outside, but inside we might feel like, oh, I need to guard myself or whatever. So that's, I think, pretty normal. But how do they respond to that defensiveness? And do they take it on you, take it out on you? Something that I've noticed a lot about abusive people is that they have such a difficult time accepting responsibility for their own actions. So they make a lot of excuses and are rather, they're rather forceful in that attempt to displace their own sense of guilt onto the person who's complaining about being hurt, right? So they might say something like, well, you're too sensitive, or you don't understand what I meant, or whatever they can. They will do whatever they can to dodge responsibility, and say, things like, well, you're responsible about how you choose to feel, and all these like little half-truths, right? So think about the way the person who you're now told about the hurt, how they respond. A healthy response is one of focusing on what they can do to make the situation right and understanding the situation. So they might ask questions, and they're not asking questions in an interrogative manner, right? It's more of, help me understand how this hurt, or help me understand the impact of my actions. So they are the ones focused really on the impact, and they're going to figure out perhaps why it hurt, have an open dialogue with you about it, and then take responsibility, right? If I've used this example before, but let's say you own a shop and somebody crashes into your store, right? Regardless of whether they were driving drunk and put themselves in a tough, not a tough position, acted irresponsibly and drove while they were drinking, or let's assume that the person was not in control of their actions. Maybe they had a seizure for the first time while they were driving and crashed into your business and destroyed it. Regardless of whether it was a seizure or whether it was drinking, your shop is now destroyed, and you're going to feel upset about it, right? Just because the person didn't mean to doesn't mean there aren't like bottles all over the floor and, a windows shattered, and, basically you have to start from scratch. That's not going to affect the rebuilding process, the person's intentions. And it's not going to also affect the impact of that car on your building. So I want you to think about that in terms of how a healthy response to this would look. I mentioned before that the person who is being, I guess, told that, hey, you did this and it was hurtful, look at how they respond. Look for them to be inquisitive instead of interrogative. They're curious to know what they did and how it affected you. Because if they really, didn't mean it, they wouldn't want to do something like that again. So those are where those questions are coming from, that intention. You also want them to focus, you want to see rather if they are, what's the word I'm looking for? Like acknowledging the impact it had on you, right? So let's say you're telling somebody that, they missed an appointment or something. Like, let's say you're supposed to get together, or they're supposed to like attend a performance that you were having, and they didn't show up, right? And they could tell you, well, you know what? I put the wrong date in my calendar and I'm sorry, right? Or they could just focus on themselves and say, like, oh, I'm so busy. Don't, I have all these responsibilities. I put the wrong date in my calendar. I'm like treading water right now in my life. It's so busy. And they focus on their intention versus the impact, right? And so that's not a healthy response. A healthy and adaptive response is the person telling you that, look, let me find a different way to phrase it. So yes, I forgot, I put the wrong date there, but I can only imagine how hurt you were not seeing my face in the audience. I can imagine how painful and disappointing it must feel when I didn't follow through on something I said I would do, regardless of the intention. So they're focusing more on the impact that it had on you versus trying to make it all about their intentions. And I've talked about this in several of my videos, but when people try to move it all the way toward intentions, that's a gray area. Anybody can claim that they didn't mean to do anything, but when they're doing that at the expense of acknowledging the impact of how the impact that it had on you, then that's not healthy behavior, right? And then lastly, you want to see some sort of like way to make it up. Like, do they offer to make it up to you in any way, right? And so I remember hearing this podcast about somebody that was part of a spiritually abusive institution. And he, once he, for whatever reasons that he was involved in that, he took responsibility for it, and he flew out to meet people that would accept his invitation for an in-person apology. If he wrote anything about somebody that was unflattering or untrue, he would rectify it in the same manner. So write, hey, I retract this article or this statement or whatever. This is not the type of person that I said they were. Whatever it is, this guy made it a point and took time off, from his schedule, his career and everything, to make sure that everybody who would accept his apology had an opportunity to accept it in person. And then he would also ask them, I know that this devastated your life. What can I do to make things up to you, right? And some people might say, well, that's stupid. He can't, make up something like that. But the point that he's asking and he's willing to make restitution is very important. And so I want you to look for those things. And again, I'm going to review them. But the first one again is taking responsibility, right? And again, we all get defensive. So there may be a little bit of defensiveness, but they're asking from a place, they're going to ask you questions. They're going to try and get to the bottom of the matter if they're dealing with this in a healthy way. They're going to want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Be inquisitive about what happened, not in an insensitive way, but like, hey, how did this hurt you? How did you interpret what I did? From the perspective of making sure that doesn't happen again, right? And then the unhealthy way to do that is just giving an interrogation. Well, what do you mean this happened? Or how could that have hurt you that way? Or being very defensive. I've seen some people too, which I think is just an awful thing to do, is repeat what the person said, but in a sarcastic or disbelieving way. So let's say, you tell somebody like, hey, I really would have loved it that you were at that performance, you missed out, and I was really hurt. The unhealthy, and I believe a sign of abusive tendencies, that person could say something like, oh my goodness, are you saying you were hurt because I didn't show up to one performance? And so if you're on the receiving end of that, you may dig in your heels, but most likely you might try to soften the blow and say, well, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I guess I wasn't that hurt. And so that is a very subtle, sneaky gaslighting way. I use that a lot on this channel, that phrase, but it's true. That person is trying to get you to doubt the reality of the pain that you're feeling. So you want to make sure that they're asking questions, not in a way to trap you or to minimize how you're feeling, but to really get to the root of the matter. And that's normal. There's going to be some back and forth. Somebody who didn't understand why they did, why you were hurt or didn't mean to, they're going to want to ask questions, but it's from a good place. It's wanting to prevent things from happening again. The second thing is that they focus on the impact it had on versus their intentions, right? If someone keeps bringing it back to, well, I didn't mean to, or you're too sensitive, or, I got a lot going on, they're focusing more on themselves versus like they're basically centering their feelings in the midst of what you're struggling with. And that is another abusive tendency. And this is often done to displace the guilt and responsibility because they just refuse to acknowledge it. And then the last thing is restitution. Find some way of like compensation, right? Whatever that is. And that shows that the person is really serious about what they did. Now, of course, we can't necessarily apply that to everything. There are always exceptions to the rules and whatnot. But in the situation of the concert, the person who missed it might say, you know what, I'm really sorry. How about like I schedule a time for us to have lunch, it's on me, and then we can watch the performance together or something like that. They're making some sort of offer. Okay. So I hope that helps. If you have anything that you would like to share in the comments below, please do, especially about the question that started the video. Do you ever struggle with wondering, did they mean it, or, did they do it on purpose? Whatever it is, I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you have or are currently struggling with it, and what tips you would give to others or questions you have for others. Okay, so I hope that helps. If you want to book a free consultation with me, go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, or you can also click on the link in the description box. May you have a wonderful and peaceful day. Bye-bye.